especially as they become hubs for relations between people, as in the Skype example. And also they control flows of public information. I mean, yeah, they become like journalistic functions they take over. And in these respects, I mean, in a sense, they cannot be avoided and they're public. They're not too different from like roads, state services, and other social and public spheres. And they're like cores of communities. They are very important for social life, for organizing, for speaking up as people. And so they are quite political. They can like even be said to embody laws and regulations, to follow Lawrence Lessing with his laws of code. And as Giorno die type, they cannot be avoided, so that's a situation similar to the one in the state. And even in the concrete sense of political, they are already quite political. I mean, for example, Google censorship in China, or the movies of Burma on YouTube and Flickr pictures in that case. Still, their users, either individually or as communities, hardly have ever any rights or freedoms over these systems. And hardly any Web 2.0 service is GPL'd, let alone truly open. And maybe an exception here is Wikipedia, which is quite big and quite open. But even that's not enough, because the GPL contains, even version 3, the web loophole. This allows changed source codes to be run on servers without the source code being available to other users, to the users of the servers. This web loophole practically reduces Richard Stallman's freedoms to use it for any purpose, to study and adapt it, to share it with others, and to share one's changes, to just force system administrators' freedoms. I mean, only they have access to the code, to the program, so only they could copy it. And this practically comes down to reducing the TPL to a BSD-style license when it comes to the web. You can use it as if it was public domain. Now, of course, there is the Avero TPL, and this license does close the web loophole, but it's not used or endorsed widely yet. And I had an email discussion with Richard Stallman about this, and yeah, his response, I mean, I greatly admire him, but his response almost shocked me. What he practically said is, if you want freedom, you should use your own copy of a program, and otherwise you should forget about freedom. That's what it comes down to. And now surely web applications and their users are much more important than this quote suggests. And surely their social networks and their communities embedded in these applications and data are very important, and as important or even more important in the future than a free operating system. Because it's software, it's important, but communities and social, the ability to form yourself socially are also important, and much of the functionality moves to the web anyway through these services. And freedoms and rights in this context are not to be ignored, as happens now. And now I will do the intermezzo about our applications. After the intermezzo, I will come back to these issues of freedom. First of all, Logi Menta, the new version, which is a platform for philosophical and humanities-related discussions. What I will talk about in this intermezzo is, first of all, I will go into humanities and how they treat the web nowadays. Then I will go into forums and wikis and why they're not just yet it. And then I will go into Logi Menta and its main features. And then I will go into some nifty features. Humanities, I don't know how many of you are active in the humanities, probably not very many, but they're quite old-fashioned in their approach to the web. If we're lucky, then all they do is like digitalize libraries. I mean, that's already quite a big achievement. But they do this like almost 90s style, and you see a lot of projects that use XML or use other technologies that are great in theory, but in practice hardly anything comes from the ground. And there are special issues like conservatism, digital illiteracy, and plurality of paradigms, especially like in history or philosophy. There are many views to things, and you cannot define things in just one way and make everyone happy. In this sense, humanities almost resemble like the horseless carriage syndrome. I mean, they approach the web as if it's just another way to distribute books or papers or whatever in a quicker fashion, and that's it. But the web is more about that later. Now we have on the web, we have forums, and forums are not very good for really intricate discussion. I mean, they're great for showing an application and getting comments on different parts, but they're not good for in-depth discussions. I mean, a thing that probably all of you have observed is fragmentations. Discussions tend to go into threads, and then only one issue is responded to, and then things get off topic, and so on and so on. And if you observe a forum for a longer time, like a discussion forum about philosophical or ethical or political issues, you see that the same discussions tend to recur over and over, because people come back to a thread, and our people usually don't come back to threads. They start a new one, and then stuff is ordered by date, and then when a thread dies out, a new one is started. Now wikis, a practical problem of wikis is that if you have disagreement in one document, like a plurality of paradigms, then it becomes quite messy. And also a practical problem is that there's no intellectual responsibility, and people in the humanities, they want to be able to say, I wrote this is what I say, and no one changes it. So both have in common either openness or quality. And there are hardly any practical like social rewards. Like there is in most forums no real ranking of how good someone is at a certain topic. So forget about forums and wikis. Now about Logimenta. It's inspired by the philosophy of science of Bruno Latour. Core values in the system are openness and quality, combining them, and combining the positive aspects of both spoken and written communication. And now about the code, something is written in Ruby on Rails, lots of Ajax and fluffy documentation and stuff like that. We're still working on it. It should have been ready by now, but no, the things like with a starter and other things cause it to be a bit delayed. It's like 15,000 lines of code. That's 3 OLO man years in 15 months, and it's under the Avero DPL. One of the central features is that anyone can add documents and anyone can add links. But you can also add links to documents that you cannot edit. So you can add links behind the words that are already there. And documents can be rated from the viewpoints of peer groups. This means that there are different peer groups, and there's room for different viewpoints, and these can match with paradigms. And authors of texts that are rated well are rewarded with voting power, so they have more influence in their peer group, which comes close to the to some aspects of the philosophy of science of Bruno Latour. And also, something special is that links are to tags, not to specific documents. So a document can have many names, and behind the name can be many documents. And this allows for incremental growth, and I will show you later how. First, about Logi. So you can add links to text that you cannot modify. This is like adding a footnote to an already published article. Besides this, the best way to do things is to fork or write new documents instead of re-editing your viewpoint in a document that is already to the point and that's concise, and so you don't put everything in one document as they do on some wikis. And besides that, the document length is like 1 to 3 pages. You should write to the point, so try to stick to one way of looking at things that you want to communicate in a document. And you can serve different audiences, so you can first write your text in a short fashion for people that already know most of the vocabulary, and then if discussion arises or if you want to use it also as introduction, then you can add behind the words, you can add further explanations. And then it practically tries to create a philosophical bazaar. Probably many of you read The Cathedral and the Bazaar. And philosophy now pretty much is cathedral. Then rating. If multiple documents have the same name, then the ratings of the documents decide which one is shown from your selected peer group. So you can see different things different times. Users pick a peer group when they want to start viewing. And this is, the system works in this way because quality and expertise is always context dependent, especially in the humanities. So we have multiple viewpoints. And besides this, these peer groups are meritocracies, as already stated. So good works means more voting power. And this also makes the peer group self-organizing. So you don't have to assign like administrators or other special roles that are binary. Now besides this, the tagging allows for incremental growth, also because they can be stacked like a directory structure. Now if you look for logi/menta, and menta cannot be found also tagged with logi, then it will go for the document just tagged with menta. And you can also link to special like language versions or to special logis, so you can make fixed links that don't change if ratings change. And besides this, you can also have in a document a link to, for example, logi/menta, and then as long as there is no menta also tagged with logi, it links to menta, and then when one becomes available, it starts to link to the new one. So this allows for incremental growth. Now the nifty features. All comments to documents are logis themselves, are documents themselves. We have a difference between what you requested and what you got. Just as I explained, you look for philosophy or Aristotle, you only find Aristotle, so you get that one. And we have cloven links, like clicking on the first part will bring you to the best logic, clicking on the second part will open a menu with a listing. The new user interface will be much more user-friendly than this one. This one is mainly for us geeks. Now the conclusion, one logic per IP, a competitive meritocracy, and incremental discussions. The pre-alpha will be soon online, we hope in like 2 or 3 weeks. Now I will go back to the main discussion, or the main presentation. That we have had. Now phony openness. We often see proponents of free and open source software and open APIs and standards on conferences like these. I think most of you are. But many care about openness only as long as it's not their own content or algorithms that need to be open. Open about news text when one runs a portal, open about server software when one runs a site, or open about libraries when they're not your core logic. This is openness below or above the level on which you operate yourself in practice. Eric Raymond here makes a difference between differentiating software and non-differentiating software. He uses the example of Amazon, and Amazon, the server software is non-differentiating and their website and the logic is differentiating. Now I think this, and others have stated this before, like Richard Stallman, this doesn't do justice to the difference between competition and combat, about not doing evil towards users, like locking them and their data in your software, about not doing evil in business, like excluding or setting back the competition by keeping your ways of doing things secret, and so they have to do double work, and about freedom and fairness in general, like in the way Stallman sees things. And this openness can be called opportunistic openness. It's being closed when openness would matter most, especially for equals. Even Microsoft has its shared source or the initiative. And in this respect, most notable, the gorilla in the room currently is, and probably for the coming century will be, Google. It's a typical example of a phony open company. Google supports free and open software, but only below or on top of their own services. It supports open content, but only as long as they process it. They're a search engine, mostly after all. And their own applications are closed like almost nothing else in the world. Now, real openness requires openness at all levels, in short, especially where it matters, so at the application level too, in this case. Now some more about the 3 planes of freedom that can be discerned. For web applications, more kinds of freedom are needed than Richard Stallman mentions. Not only freedom at the software level, but also at the level of data and at the level of the running application. The community needs freedoms there. Now to reiterate, for software we need the freedom to run it for any purpose, to study it and adapt it, to share it with others, or to share modifications with others. And these freedoms should be there for all users, not just for system administrators. So the AdvaS GPL should be used for web applications if you want to be open. And here, at this plane, this is a plane that most people see in the open source world. But I don't know if any of you read the novel Flatland by Edwin Abbott. I surely would if I were you. It's a nice book, interesting book about a flat world of only 2 dimensions. Now the problem is the users of data, they need their freedom too. They need the freedom to use their data for any purpose. So there should be no restrictions on the way they can use it. They should be able to adapt it. So there should be versatile APs. And they should be able to share it with others. So they should be able to export it. And the APs should be public when the data is not private. And they should be able to share modifications. And in most contexts, this means unlimited use in mashups of APs. So not just 50,000 times and then you have to pay to Google. Besides APs, these freedoms require in most cases the usage of a Creative Commons attribution license for the content. Because only then the data is free in the sense in which software is free. And last, and this is a point surely frequently overlooked, the community also needs freedoms. It, as a community, needs the freedoms to set or co-determine the application's purposes, like in Mira with being able to use your copy of a program for anything you want. It should be able to adapt the application through some public process, like you should be able to change code. You should be able to share all data and software running the community, like sharing a copy of a program with others. And communities, especially as a last resort, should be able to move out and found a new community. This is like the right of exodus, like the right to share your changes with others in the normal software realm. And now, besides APs and the Creative Commons Attribution License, these freedoms also require a thorough GPL code, because data, especially data of a community, is not worth, at least not worth as much as it should be without the code to use it. And now something that doesn't seem to exist yet, like a kind of democratic application constitution. You can find it partially at Wikipedia. The most fundamental requirement would still be, though, that it grants the freedom of exodus. People should be able to found a new community, because this puts the importance of the freedom, this puts the rights with the community and makes it more in the interest of the application developer to provide the other freedoms, the freedom of determination, adaptation and sharing. But still, all 4 freedoms, all 4 community freedoms are important in themselves, and especially the first 2, the determination and the adaptation, will become more important as the application gains users. Because as it becomes a hub, something you cannot ignore, every attempt at forking or exodus or whatever, will be practically impossible because of the fact that still many users use the other application. So to conclude, there can be three planes of freedom can be distinguished. The plane of software, which is well known here. The place of data, which is also, at least in the Web 2.0 community, acknowledged to a large extent, and the freedoms for the community. Now, the practical thing is that none of these freedoms should be missed for openness to be true openness in a Web 2.0 context. Now the conclusions and the discussion. Freedom and free open source software matter for the web. Phony openness seems to be quite common. Real openness requires freedom at the three planes, the four freedoms at the three planes. So that comes down to Affero, GPL, Creative Commons content, and yeah, especially for small apps, that's a good start. And now about the Logi Foundation. I mean, even though I'm quite outspoken about these topics, the Logi Foundation surely doesn't try to be like the Free Software Foundation for the web. We just have our applications. That's where, thinking about these things started, and that's where it leads to for us. We're trying to make the logi.org site and community practical success for the people interested in philosophical, political, or humanities-related discussions. And we foremost try to make this application work. Your help is most welcome, and you're also welcome with other applications. We have some other applications, people working on other applications under the foundation. Now some problems for discussion. Who are aware or interested in their freedoms? I mean, when I speak to my younger brother, he just uses like Google Mail, whatever, without a blink. He doesn't even think that it's possibly problematic. Now, what about other needs and interests? I mean, Web 2.0 startups, they can get lots of funding, they can get lots of everything. But free software for the web especially is still a difficult thing to set up. And how to distinguish between public and private data. I mean, often offering a download of the entire database will not be enough. Because then you have email addresses of everyone in there, and there's some parties very interested in that. So you have to have like custom code for that. But it has also implications for the freedom of a community to move away. So their thoughts have to be given to that. And also a practical problem. I mean, the entirely free web, as we now almost have, or practically have with operating systems, that's quite difficult because first of all, it's much less clear what services should be there, what free services should be there on the web. I mean, the web is still very fluid. And also a practical problem, and that's one which I wish to end with, is that the future of the web is still very difficult to chart. So this is an attempt, and we'll see what do you people think of it. Questions, remarks.
One of the points. Battery is there.
Okay.
I'll just start, if you can hear me.
Repeat the question.
Sorry. One of the points of having freedom in software is that you can determine what is running on your system. So nothing sneaky is happening behind your back. But even if Google would open up their code, there's no guarantee that that code they release is actually running on the servers. And it's their servers. You cannot check it, and you cannot replace it with anything you've written. So what are your viewpoints on that?
I think that indeed the security advantage of open source is less on the web. But there could be possibilities like allowing some way of signing the source code and then having some especially if it's community rights, having someone in the community that gets the right to check it, like like back when inspectors of the United Nations went to Iraq to search for weapons of mass destruction.
Okay.
So, but it's a practical problem. You need the web makes all these things much more complicated. That's for sure. Any other question?
Yeah, it's basically, well, touches this question. Isn't it more useful to develop distributed applications for which each user has control over its own application, and you don't need someone to host the infrastructure to provide services?
So yeah, you asked whether it would be better nevertheless to use distributed applications or to develop them. I think a practical problem is that the practical advantages of centralization currently are so big. I mean, you can easily know that you found all your friends and that all people that made you friends, for example in Facebook. Doing that in a distributed way would require each node to search all other nodes or other problems. I mean, I also met once someone who is working on distributed search engines, and there are some workarounds, but it remains almost infinitely more complicated than doing it centralized, and especially for less straightforward things as searching, but for you name it, for for example for something like Flickr pictures. How do you know that you get all the pictures that were published in some category or things like that? I mean, I think it's practically quite difficult to do that well.
It's a technical problem, and I suppose it's easier to solve than the problem than the other problem, namely that you can convert companies to free web.
No, but first of all, this is about ethics and not per se about force or power. Another thing is that with those distributed applications, you still have the problem of convincing users, because most users are not very aware yet about the importance of freedom, and they will just, surely for now, while the web is still something like the Wild West, use whatever works first. So that problem you have in that case too. Other questions? Maybe about Lottie.
I've read some discussions about the Avero GPL and some objections against that from sysadmins mostly, is that they say, well, you limit the freedom of the one running the server because, well, suppose you can solve the problem that the user can adjust the code on the server. Then the sysadmin says, well, you limit my freedom because then I can choose which code runs on the server. Then the users choose that. So
to repeat the question, you say that these freedoms, the community's freedoms especially, limit the freedoms of the system administrator to decide by himself which code runs on his server. Yes, I think the practical problem of freedom and ethics is that it's not just about maximizing the freedom of individuals, but of balancing the freedoms. And in some cases, freedom for one person or one group means less freedom for the other. And especially as these are three planes, they really have different conceptual frameworks, different ways of looking at things. There will be conflicts between those. And these are also things that have to be explored. But in a practical sense, one curious idea that we had is setting up a code wiki, like having a virtualized machine and then having inside of a virtual machine, practically some scripts that pulls code from a subversion repository every 15 minutes and then installs that and runs that. I mean, of course, it's not practical for any purpose except for developing code for the web in an open way. It would be just an interesting experiment. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have an answer to what you proposed. How can we give the users the same rights or as the admin? But I think we must make an important distinction here between the freedom of the user and the power of the user. As in, the user may have the freedom to modify the source code, to inspect it, to copy it, whatsoever. He's still using someone else's machine. And that's what we do in the end. I want to use Gmail because it's highly convenient, but it's not my machine. That's the whole point. I can access it anywhere on the planet. It's in Gmail. I rent some web service, and they can do whatever they want with the machine. They can decide what code runs on it. But my freedom, if Gmail was free software, it'd be great. Means that I can, at any point, if I'm dissatisfied with it, take my data, take the code, and run it on my own damn server. That's what, in my opinion, that's what freedom is. That's why it's important. Just the same as for most users, 95% of the users on the planet don't care about source code and modifying it. But it's important they have the freedom to do so. It's just like the freedom to be in Brussels right now. We're not using it, but if I restrict it from you, then there's a problem. We don't necessarily use that freedom, but we don't have it's just the possibility of doing it if we want to. I think that would be my answer to the admin versus users problem. Just a remark.
Yeah. Also, a practical comparison that may be useful here is that between that with democracy. I mean, most people in practice don't have much to say about how politics is done. Even more people don't give a damn about it, but still the capability of the basic democratic rights or people to vote or speak up or things like that, those are important freedoms, even if not used, even if there's only a tiny minority of MPs that can practically have much influence. Like the MPs could be compared to the system administrators in this case.
What about actually the hardware? The backbone of the internet is commercial. The pipelines are commercial things. They're not open. They don't give you the freedom actually.
No,
it's
but they're
paid
not.
service.
They're not software, and
that's true. But all your software runs through these pipes.
Yeah, but I think also there are possibilities of setting up mesh networks and other alternatives, and also, yeah, I think that open source matters most for software, for information, for things like that. I mean, I'm not a proponent of open source apples or open source apples in the eat sense or apples or beer, open source beer. I mean, it's nice, it's funny, but it's communism, and the software world is fundamentally, the world of information is fundamentally different from the world of physical objects or services. So. No more questions? Or? Okay, then I would like to thank everyone for being here.